The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place, and among his own kin, and in his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deed there, apart from cursing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed by the lack of their faith. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As you know, we're only a couple of doors down from the Lakewood Sheriff's Department, which has been there how long, Gary?
100 years.
It's been there 100 years, and many, many deputy sheriffs have served there, including our own Gary Alley. How long were you at that station?
100 years.
Yeah, now I want you to imagine them having a retirement party, or like a reunion party, and a lot of the retired deputy sheriffs show up and renew their old acquaintances and friendships, and the speaker gets up in front of the whole banquet and reads off the list of all the officers that are attending and what they're doing, and he'll mention, well, it's good to see Officer Bill Mungovan. He's here. When he retired, he moved to Lake Havasu and is enjoying his retirement, playing lots of golf. And then there's Officer Tim O'Reilly. Good to see him here. He's still living in Garden Grove, but having a good time with his grandchildren and enjoying his retirement. And Detective Gary Alley's here, and would you guys believe that he's now an ordained deacon in the Catholic Church? What do you think the reaction would be? I think they'd be on the floor laughing. Gary Alley, an ordained minister? You mean like he could be our chaplain? No, impossible. I mean, we know him, right? He was with us on some of those Tijuana trips, right? They, I'm sure, would be incredulous and could not believe that Gary Alley would now be an ordained minister of the gospel. Well, that's simply because the normal instinct is to prejudge Gary from what they knew way back when, which was perhaps less than the profession of being an ordained minister might be today, right? But to limit him to that, of course, would be wrong and foolish. That's prejudging or prejudice, right? Just like I have a little brother who's supposed to have an IQ of 160, which is genius level, right? And when I heard that, I said, my little brother? No way. I mean, I saw him do plenty of stupid things. And I know, because I was stupidly there with him, doing some of those things. How could he have an IQ of 160? Well, I guess he really does. And I guess it's hard for me to believe it, because then I have to admit, boy, he's a lot smarter than I am, right? Prejudging is kind of a normal human instinct, but one we have to fight, because prejudice can be a slap in the face of God, and it certainly can harm our relationships with others. when we prejudge others because of their profession, or only judging them on their past, or the color of their skin, or ethnicity, that's reprehensible. It can be a horrible, damaging kind of thing. But there's other kinds of prejudice. There's other kinds of prejudging that also interferes with what God wants us to do. If you remember last week in the gospel, there was the story of a woman who was suffering with hemorrhages, who was so desperate to be healed that she wormed her way through a crowd just to touch the cloak of Jesus. And of course, as soon as she did, she was healed. Well, first of all, for her to do that, she was really desperate because she risked her life doing that. If you suffered with hemorrhages, anything to do with blood, you were considered unclean. And if you were unclean and you deliberately touched other people, which would have made them unclean, well, that was capital punishment time. If somebody had recognized her doing that, working her way through the crowd, and by necessity bumping into other people, if somebody had recognized her as having that thing, they could have shouted her name out and called for her stoning to death right on the spot. No trial, no judge, no jury, just instant stoning to death. That's how seriously they took that rule. So for her to risk her life to touch him, she had to be desperate. And then in that gospel, if you notice, when Jesus turned around to talk to her about that, he didn't say, "You're healed now and you're very welcome." He didn't say, "Aren't you glad I did this for you?" He said, "Your faith has saved you." Something inside of you allowed this to happen. That message from last week is continued into today's gospel, where we can see that Jesus couldn't work miracles because people prejudged him as being unable to do that. Because, is he not the son of the carpenter from Nazareth? This is not somebody we knew who we watched to grow up. In other words, they prejudged him based simply on knowing him, and therefore closed their minds to the fact that he really could be the Messiah. They refused to allow any kind of faith to come in and enter. And so the gospel of last week showing the power of positive faith, the gospel this week showing the fact that if we don't allow God to have the power, he in fact won't have the power. When people come up to me and say things like, "Oh, I'll never be able to finish school," I always annoyingly ask them the same question. Is that a prediction or is that a decision? Are you predicting the future, meaning that your leg's going to be broken tomorrow and you'll go bankrupt and have 3 strokes, and so it'll be absolutely impossible for you to ever go to school? Are you making that prediction? Or are you simply deciding that you don't want to go to the trouble of what it's going to take to finish school? And it's usually that's the case. And by the way, it's usually because they have the same problem I do, which is math phobia. Really, that's what keeps people from finishing degrees the most, is their fear of having to take college-level algebra. And I understand that fear. Right? That's kept me out of school. But that fear can lead to prejudice, that can lead to sabotaging your own success, and sabotaging and blocking God's grace that might actually give us the grace to finish algebra, that might actually let us find the time, the way, the money, resources that it takes to finish that degree or go to school in the first place. And that kind of prejudice is also what God doesn't want of us, because it blocks grace. It blocks grace. So my brothers and sisters, if we're to reflect on what God asks us to do, clearly it's to avoid any kind of prejudice against other people that would keep us from seeing perhaps God's goodness working through them, but also the kind of prejudice that blocks grace from entering ourselves, that the miracles we would want to have can happen if we have the faith that it could happen, and that we simply have to get out of the way. Start making real predictions instead of bad decisions. Choosing freely to embrace God's call to us, which sometimes will be good news and sometimes not good news. But definitely, if we are blocked, if we don't allow God's grace to come in, it won't. It won't. We have to choose to allow miracles to happen. And when we do, they will. Please stand.